Please join me in welcoming Tim.
All right. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you all for coming. I didn't get the memo that Saku got about wearing the black t-shirt and trying to look Silicon Valley, so I guess he gets the Steve Jobs award. I hope I just don't get the John Scully award. I also think to myself, it would be so much cooler if I had that accent, if I could say, is we scaling the innovation in the social, but wouldn't it be like, I'd get a little more play, I think, I know. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be able to take just a few minutes of your time to share the story of the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Our chief executive, Karen Nemi, is here to talk a little bit about the Aspen Institute's National Commission on this work, to try to integrate worlds where for-profit and not-for-profit, where public institutions and private competitive institutions live on the same ground. I've been involved with Leeds Equity for many years, so I think I understand to some extent the innovative spirit, the energy of those of you who are coming from for-profit spaces, looking for innovations that are scalable, where the results are there for kids, but also results for bottom line accountability structures, and thinking about ways in which we can bridge some of those gaps and find common ground. So I want to just start you with a little ancient history. Archimedes will be familiar to many of you. Give me a lever, he said, and a place to stand, and I will move the earth. I'm here, and I think many of you are here. Maybe this whole conference has been created because there, in some of our eyes, is a unique moment in time. There are opportunities to scale and change and, in fact, move the earth when it comes to children and kids, to schools and school and community institutions. There's an opportunity unlike almost none we've ever had in our history. I am here because I believe we do have levers, if you will, and I think we can build places to stand to move ahead. It's a tough time, though, not just for kids, but for all of us. This is one of those new acronyms circulating in the marketing world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Each in its own way a distinctive challenge for kids, each in its own way contributing to the challenge children bring to schools, each in its own way contributing to the challenge each one of you is sitting with today, on your phones, in your meetings, beginning to scale something, trying to scale something to a higher level. What will happen next? Will this be sustainable? Will there be an innovation? Will I be disintermediated? With my kids be disintermediated if they learn a certain skill? This enormous uncertainty, we see it in kids in so many different ways. UCLA's most recent survey of college freshmen showing 34% of college freshmen feel clinical levels of anxiety. 41% feel consistently overwhelmed every day. The stress and anxiety that our kids are bringing to school is reflected in the broader culture we're all living. But it's not the first time, and I just want to see if has anyone here seen Hamilton? Anybody listen to the music? Anybody memorize the entire soundtrack? Okay, we have a few. So I thought to myself, what's a comparable time where people are thinking and talking about this? And Lin-Manuel Miranda actually said one of the reasons he went about trying to write Hamilton was because he thought Hamilton spoke to this time. So here's a very short clip of one of the iconic pieces from Hamilton.
And I am not throwing away my shot. I'm not throwing away my shot. I'm just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. And I'm not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. And yo, I'm just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. And I'm not throwing away my shot. We gonna rise up, time to take a shot. We gonna rise up, time to take a shot. We gonna rise up, it's time to take a shot. Rise up, it's time to take a shot. Rise up, it's time to take a shot. Rise up, take a shot, shot, shot. It's time to take a shot, time to take a shot. And I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. I am Alexander Hamilton, just you wait. I am not throwing away my shot.
Bam. Okay, you can applaud for Lin-Manuel if you want. So, I'm thinking to myself as I watch that, if we have in common, to some extent, with that time and space, with this young man, orphaned, immigrant, dirt poor, educated, yes, but scrappy, hungry, young, angry, frustrated, uncertain world. What about the grit? What about the resilience? What about the strength? What about the willpower? What about the toughness? What about the vision? Where is the deep sense of desire that Alexander Hamilton brought to that moment, that George Washington brought, Thomas Jefferson, that all of those Americans brought to a moment when everything was against them, and yet they had the strength? So I'm going to ask you guys to participate just for a quick minute, because we don't have much time, but I'm going to ask you to do an exercise. We're in the whole field of social and emotional learning, so you're going to have to take at least a 90-second pause from your mobile devices, and I want you to think for a moment, first to yourself, about a shot you want to take right now in your life. Something that's sitting on your horizon, where you would turn to someone and say, I am not throwing away this shot. I am not going to miss this chance in my career, in my family, in my life, whatever. If you can, pull that up. And if you're comfortable, and I hope you are, I'm going to give you about 60 seconds, so 30 seconds each. And I'd love it if you wouldn't mind just sharing with a partner, and if there's 2 or 3, awkward numbers are fine, just sharing a threesome, like you guys here. You all have to do it together. Just take a minute if you're comfortable, and with your neighbor, share the story of the shot you want to take right now. If you haven't switched, switch. Okay, if I can invite you back. How many classroom teachers are here? If I can ask you to come back, thank you for your robust conversation. I love it that you don't want to stop. This is good. This is a good example of where me losing time is good. So now I want to note that there are several people who refused to do the exercise and stayed on their mobile devices the entire time. I'm not going to point you out over here. But for those of you who did, would anyone like to share in 30 seconds or less either what they heard or what they said? Yes, sir.
Hello, everybody. I'm a middle school principal in Florida.
Nice.
I see kids every day, not all of them, but there's kids that are just, they're disengaged. They're apathetic.
All right, sorry about that. Middle school principal, Florida. Hello, everybody. I see kids every day, and they're disengaged. And everybody in this room is here because you are part of that thought process that we've got to change the way we're doing things. Our education system is set up for when we were an industrialized economy. Things are different. Municipalities can't even get how to regulate Uber the right way, and by the time they fix it, driverless cars are going to be here. We can't keep being this far behind. And everybody knows that, but not enough people are doing it. So I would just challenge everybody not to miss your shot in taking the correct action. And if that's getting state legislators to come into a school and see this is the result of your decisions from an ivory tower far away, whatever it takes, do it.
Nice. So that just summarized my entire talk, so thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, one more. This gentleman with a hand over here. Yes. Please. Don't pitch your company, by the way. You can't do that.
Brad Pearl, I have been in the classroom for 24 years. I'm working with, thank you. I just started working with adults, but my shot for me is to get out of the comfort of a predicted classroom life with a pension and all that stuff and move into a leadership position like a principal of a middle school and become a leader of a personalized institute for middle school. I think that would be exciting. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So just briefly, what you just did would have been, I would consider a social and emotional learning exercise. Why? Because as I asked you, if you participate, if you were comfortable with it, I asked you first to go inside. I asked you first to practice some self-awareness, to contact and connect with your own hopes and dreams, and to be able to be in touch with where you want to go right now. So before I'm going to try to teach you anything, I asked you what you want to learn as your teacher, if you will, in this setting. Secondly, I asked you in a very condensed period of time to practice communication skills so that you would see what's important to you not just as a personal pursuit, but as a shared one, even if it was only in a pair. Now, all of a sudden, your goal, your aspiration in this extremely condensed window of time becomes a social one. You now have a peer in your classroom, in your life, in your school, with whom you share a sense of determined destiny and goal. And now, as I come to talk to you about what I think my shot is, hopefully you are in the room in a completely different way than if I had just come to you and begun to drone on with information and slides. The purpose of this short exercise is to say that the fundamental missing link, now I'm going to be audacious and black and white and binary in this statement. The fundamental mistake we make, both of you guys alluded to it, and I don't know how many others you have thought this, is that we do not understand that the fundamental exercise of teaching and learning is relational. We have been operating, as you said, for 100 years on the myth that the teaching and learning is the bolting on of a commodity called information into a mechanical device called a brain. And it is fundamentally wrong in every respect. My mentor, Jim Comer, showed me this slide, not this slide, on a whiteboard when I was 23 years old. He drew these two shapes, and he said, let me explain this to you. What is the difference between these two shapes to a first grader? And I'm looking at them. The left is an A, and the right there's a squiggly line. So he answers the question. There's one difference, and only one difference. They're not inherently more interesting. They're not inherently more colorful. There's one difference. A significant adult wants you, the child, to learn the shape on the left. That's it. It's 100% a relational transaction. The child has no inherent interest in the shape on the left, except that someone who matters to them, someone with whom they've connected, someone around whom their relationships are hinging for their future, wants them to know it, and therefore they trust that person and embark on the learning. We have been living this myth for far too long. That teaching and learning is the mechanical transfer of the mechanical transfer operation of a body of facts onto a body. And as long as we don't break this myth, nothing, in my view, radical, maybe arrogant sounding statement, nothing any of us does matters. Let me try to defend that statement. A few years ago, we founded a group called CASEL that Karen leads. We decided to take these insights and try to package them into a framework that schools could use. We tried to scan all the available child development knowledge, not curricular knowledge, then blend it with curricular knowledge and build a framework that teachers could use to form a new field in education. the field of social and emotional learning and social and emotional development that would complement mathematics and science and social studies and language arts, that would complement arts and athletics, but that would form a new basis around teachers could be trained and teachers could teach and children could learn. Why? Because their self-regulation and self-awareness was unlocked, their relationships were both safe and challenging, and their capacity to make decisions was supported in a supportive environment. This was an attempt to build a field. It's probably iconic image, and this is taught, and I used this to teach when I was a high school teacher, is a problem-solving framework. This one happens to have been developed by one of our chief knowledge officer, Roger Weisberg, the stoplight. You can teach this set of lessons for up to 45 days. It is so beautifully complex and nuanced for children. Any of you who have kids, I highly recommend get one and put it up on your refrigerator, whether your kids are 4 years old or 34 years old. Having a framework around how to solve problems is a critical way of creating a common vocabulary so kids can self-regulate, calm down, manage their stress, develop coping skills, have consequential thinking skills, planning skills, communication skills, and so on. So this was the attempt to take that framework and productize it as curriculum. And now there are hundreds of these. I used this one in an after-school program, 1986. The principal asked me to start a program for boys in a high school. I was in a high school, 1,500 kids, 99% African-American, urban center in America. We started an after-school club for kids. We called it the Young Men's Leadership Group. And the guys all would come, and we'd take on projects in the community, in the neighborhood for themselves. They'd raise money, run basketball games, fundraisers, and the whole 9 yards. And one of the young guys, one day, the principal comes to me and says, one of your guys, Lamont Young. I said, yeah, he's in the group. He said, oh, you know, I got bad news. He was shot last night. And I said, no, I think you have the wrong guy. He said, no, that's your guy, Lamont Young, shot 7 times point blank. So I've been introducing problem solving, and I've been working with these guys for the better part of the year. All of them tough, beautiful, angry, loving, aspiring teenagers. That's it. Just the whole complex, just like you were when you were a teenager, just like every teenager you have. And I'm taking a deep breath. My student, 7 times point blank, after all this. So I went down. He survived long enough to make it to the hospital. And I went down to the hospital after school. You know, I walk into the room, there's a policeman outside the room because obviously he is part of a crime scene. And I look at him covered in bandages, head, face, legs, elevated, monitors, you know, clinging to just the littlest bit of life. And, you know, what do you say? You don't say anything. You have an unconscious person near death. And I'm going to say it, in a very meaningful way, I loved this young man. So I just walked over to the bedside and I just said, you know, I held his hand and I said, you know, Lamont, all the guys back at Hill House, they're thinking about you and praying for you, and, you know, we're with you. And I turned to walk out and I heard a little noise and I saw his lips move and I thought, you know, maybe he was trying to say something. I leaned over. And he whispers to me, Shrives, that's what they call me, next time, I'll use problem solving. And on the one hand, it infuriated me because I thought to myself, you know, if I'd done a better job, he wouldn't have been there. And on the other hand, it broke my heart because I thought about the things you're saying, about all these kids coming through the chain, right? And they're just being moved along a system that doesn't work for them. And I got to him at a certain point in his life and did my best at some level, and it wasn't good enough. The happy news is that Lamont Young survived, and I have this little picture of me and him last year when I went back to New Haven. He's an MSW student now, today, at Fordham University. He's in his mid-40s, yeah. But he's an inspiration not because it's a success story, but because in some ways it's a failure story. It's a story of too little, too late. You know, yes, he's good now, but no one would wish on anyone what he's been through. Which is why we look now at very comprehensive models. So we don't believe that social and emotional learning is a program, a project, a fix, a thing, a to-do, a checkbox. This is an example of one of the benchmark programs we have in our movement called Ruler, run out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And what you'll see here in these boxes, you don't have to look at all this, is you'll see a comprehensive approach, not just classroom instruction, but school culture and climate. Not just school culture and climate, but discipline strategy. Not just discipline strategy, but community engagement. Not just community engagement, but also parent engagement. It's a paradigm shift. Hard to productize as a singular item, powerfully beyond our idea, beyond our biggest ideas, powerful as a paradigm shift. Now, you may say, why is this important? We've got a lot of things, and there are a lot of reasons why most people, whether they say it or not, think this is not important. So I'm going to give you 8 slides in rapid succession, which you don't have to pay any attention to unless you think to yourself, I'd like to see that later. But this information about the relational dimensions of learning is 100 years old at least. So when you talk about innovation, we don't have any. All we're doing is trying to marshal the best knowledge we have from teachers and principals in the American schools and around the country and social scientists. So if you say, well, what about intelligence? Even Binet and even Weschler will tell you that there are non-intellective factors. This is in 1943 in learning. John Dewey will tell you that it is almost completely the social context that matters to how and if children learn. Vygotsky, great theorist, will talk to you about proximal zones of learning and will connote to you the ways in which the internal devices of the child are stimulated, enlightened by the social processes that surround the child, the proximal zones of learning. Robert Waldinger will tell you that after 75 years, the most comprehensive longitudinal study, one of the most comprehensive in the history of the social sciences, the study of happiness and life satisfaction. It was done in Boston with Harvard and Boston area students. Last year completed the 75th anniversary of this longitudinal study. Will tell you that only one factor matters in determining life satisfaction: relationships. That's it. That's it. Blue collar, white collar, rich, poor, urban, suburban, you name your race, sexual orientation, disability, whatever it is, that's the issue that will most determine whether you have life satisfaction or not. It's no different for kids. Let's keep going. Neurology, our new best friend. So we used to say emotion drives attention, executive function is driven by emotion, and attention drives learning. We saw a presentation I did from the neuroscientist Pat Kuehl just a few days ago, where she was presenting the most recent studies of infants and the way in which the neural pathways are stimulated in learning. This is probably my favorite slide, like, of all time. You see the little fellow, right? Joining in the social network the way he knows how. There's science to support this. Watch the primary determinants, the primary elements of social mimicking. You can see in 3 months, 6 months, this is at 12 months, where the infant can capture the gaze of the teacher or the parent, and then not only try to keep the gaze, but follow the gaze. Where the parent goes, the child goes. Look at that bottom right slide. Isn't that just unbelievably gorgeous? The adult didn't tell the child to turn. The child just modeled the turn. You can teach Mandarin Chinese, as I'm sure you all know, to a 1-year-old and make enormous progress. But here's what happens when you try to do it electronically. Same lessons, same language, same information on a screen instead of through a human. Guess what the percentage of uptake is? 0. Nothing. The child learns nothing without the relationship. Same thing is true of gender roles. Child will internalize gender roles starting in 3, 4, 5 years old, will internalize stereotypes shortly thereafter, and will internalize a crushing of their own aspirations by the time they're 10 or 12 years old. This is the normal or a natural sequence for young girls, for little girls growing up to be young adolescents. And this is all acquired from, guess where? You, me, the social context of school. So you don't have to believe me, or you don't have to believe Vygotsky, or theorists like Dewey, or intelligence measurement people like Wechsler or Binet, but believe the neuroscientists. It's actually not emotion that drives attention, it's actually social connection. So all those kids whose head are on the desk in middle school, or who have checked out of high school, whether they're still there physically or not, they have checked out of the relationships that matter. They have said, you don't have anything from me. We have nothing between us that matters. They have not checked out of math and science. They don't know math and science. They haven't decided they hate Shakespeare or Langston Hughes or Harriet Tubman. They don't know those people. They've decided that there's not a single relationship in the school that matters to them. So here's more. Social and emotional development contributes to your physical health. Full stop. Maybe you all know that, but it's worth remembering. Study that our colleague Mark Greenberg just did for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, one of the premier health foundations in the world. Where are they shifting their attention? To social and emotional development, because they think it contributes to health. The labor market, it's all about employability. If you look at what the Business Roundtable says are the most important employability skills, we want our kids to have post-college and employment opportunities. Look at you probably can't see it, but interpersonal skills, teamwork, problem solving, readiness, cooperation. These are the skills employers are asking for. Like you said, maybe we can't train the kids to have the technology that'll be there in 10 years. Obviously, we can't. But we can train them to have the problem-solving skills to be able to use the technology that'll be there in 10 years, and that's what the employers are asking us for. School satisfaction, I'm just going to go quickly. Brookings and AEI last year did a joint report on the income gap. Their primary recommendation, or I should say one of their 3 recommendations, educate the whole child to promote social, emotional, and character development to close the income divide in our country. Cost-benefit analysis has been fantastic. Here's the one educators really have to turn their lessons on. High-quality, evidence-based social and emotional learning programs, when effectively implemented, reduce behavior problems, reduce anxiety, and improve test scores. So you're going to get measured on reading and math test scores. Whether any of us likes it or not, we might like it, we might not. But if you want to improve test scores, you have to have the child in the classroom. Not physically, not body, the whole child. And this evidence suggests that there are powerful ways to do it. Teachers want it. Here's the demand that we're seeing across the country. Hundreds of districts and states now asking for this. 5 years ago, I would have said to you, my job here is to convince you that we should create demand. Today, my job is to convince you to support the development of more effective supply. So here's my brash, I hope you disagree with me if you don't like it, statement. We either do this work with attention to the whole child or it's malpractice. If you're locked in a 19th century paradigm and you think it's okay, to me that ought to be, we don't have that term in education, but it ought to be considered malpractice, to ignore the evidence of what works to help children grow and develop and optimize their development. So we're not throwing away our shot. I hope you hear in my voice the excitement, the enthusiasm, the importance of this work right now, and the chance to take it to the next level. A couple of just quick closing slides about where we're going. First, we have to change the narrative. We are still locked in narratives that limit the ways in which we think. So for instance, we were with the teachers union last week in Cleveland, and they used to collective bargain around working conditions. Terms for working conditions, salaries, all these kinds of things. They've changed the language from working conditions to learning conditions. And all of a sudden, the collective bargaining agreement is completely different. They have put social and emotional learning into the collective bargaining agreement. Why? Because they were able to change the narrative, flip it just the slightest bit, and all of a sudden reveal that what's important for a teacher is a safe classroom, a supported classroom, a classroom where professional development is offered, where they can get the kinds of curriculum that is based on what works, as we heard earlier, It's a focus not just on schools, but on schools and children and families and communities nested together. It's not education just as information transfer. The premium of the future for schools will be inspiration, not information. Kids are walking around with the Library of Congress in their pocket. They don't need a teacher to tell them what's in it. They need a teacher to help connect them to what they want to learn and why it matters. So we have to change the narrative. Here's just a beautiful little example of that. This is a 12-year-old in the city of Chicago who wrote at the end of her school year where they've infused social and emotional learning into their program. I'm sorry, the screen is too, oh, here it is. I can read it on this side. Just because I'm sensitive, I'm not dramatic, I'm not fragile, I'm not weak. I'm emotionally intelligent, 12 years old. Just because I'm smart, I'm not lonely, I'm not a loser, I'm not awkward, I'm intelligent. Just because I'm 10, I'm not immature and hopeless and worthless. I'm young. Just because I'm a girl, I'm not worried about my looks, I'm not bad at sports, I am not weak. To me, this is a child who is helping us change the narrative. This is a fierce learner. This is a young child ready to embrace learning. You know she's going to do it well. She's in a school with 30% of the kids coming from homeless shelters. So don't say, oh, that's a star. That's not a star. She just got up in the context of hundreds of kids getting up to tell their stories. Second, we got to meet demand. Program providers in this space need innovation money. They need scaling money. There's a lot of good people with a lot of good evidence and a lot of good research, but we need to get measurement up to speed. The Walton Family Foundation has supported some work in this area that CASEL's doing with an assessment work group. We need improvements in measurement. We need improvements in the scaling of programs, and we need to continue to innovate. If you're interested in any of that stuff, you'll recognize to some extent this graphic, which tells you that at the top slide here is what most schools, I'm sorry to say this, what most schools look like and what most of us contribute to. We got something new for you, Mr. Principal. We got the next best thing. New technology, new tool, new book, new series, new data management system, new evidence tracking thing. And what does it result in? Chaos. If we want alignment and we want scale, we're going to have to commit ourselves to supporting schools, developing a common framework, and not bombarding them with whatever happens to be the most recent fancy. Third and finally, boom, we're looking at public policy. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to say that this is not a red or a blue issue. Public policy is complex in the education space. We live in a divided country, and the country's divided typically over education policies. But this is a purple issue. Here's a set of standards that was recently published in this space. And I just did this little red-blue circles just so you can see that some of the language sounds very blue, and by golly, some of it sounds very red. Isn't that interesting? Because actually most of us agree on child development. Most of us agree on what it takes to grow and develop and learn. And if we shift the focus from paying and punishing to teaching and learning, we got a lot of agreement as a nation. Marshaling the energy and the evidence to support teachers on the front lines of trying to support that is another story. But we do not have to be balkanized and in a fight over this. Here's my most recent example. Last week, I sat down with a high school student in Cleveland. Here's his senior capstone project. He read over 50 articles on this, Stop the Hate. On the cover are the names of both police officers and Cleveland children who have either killed one or who have been killed by one another. This is not about being against the police, and it's not about being against Black Lives Matter. It's about, as he writes, there are so many cops killing our people and so many people killing our cops. Why can't we be equal? Louis Reyes Jr., he writes, this is supposed to be a free country, and all we do is kill each other. We're having a war within our people. Why is there such hate and racism? Why don't we understand how important one's life is? We're taking parents from their kids and kids from their parent. They say we're all free, but yet we are all scared. It's not a blue kid talking, it's not a red kid talking, it's an American talking. Sounds a little bit like Alexander Hamilton. He wants a free country. Same battle, same challenge. Pharrell Williams said this just a couple weeks ago on the air. You know, we're living in a divided time. But these kinds of voices matter to our kids. These kinds of voices matter to scaling supply. These kinds of voices matter to changing policy. These kinds of people have the capacity to energize all of us around this vision. You know, I get it. Sometimes the divisive stuff works. But you have to choose what side you're on. And listen to the words, I'm choosing empathy. I'm choosing inclusion. Cornerstones of a social and emotional learning agenda. Who's going to teach empathy? Who's going to teach grit? Who's going to teach inclusion? Who's going to teach character? Our teachers can do this. It's doable. We just need the revolution of ways to think about it. And if none of that matters to you, I hope this does. This is Scarlett Lewis and her little boy Dylan. Dylan was murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School when he was 6 years old. And Scarlett has chosen to create a Choose Love movement, which she's bringing. It's a social emotional learning-based curriculum to the schools of Connecticut with the support of the governor and some of the universities there in Connecticut. Scarlett is such an extraordinary human being that she has dedicated her work to Adam Lanza, the young man who murdered her son, which she'll tell you, how could anybody live the way he was living with that much pain? How could anybody get through our schools with that much pain? We have to change things. So in honor of her little boy, in honor of Lamont, in honor of Lewis, in honor of our kids, in honor of those people we don't want to have miss this shot, I hope we can engage you all in helping us to think about the communications, the policy, the innovation streams necessary to ground everything we do in the evidence base that supports the development of children emotionally, socially, and academically. Thank you very much. And thank you. Thank you.